So how is Kevin Knight's class?
Really interesting.
We should have him teaching this class. So he's a wonderful, wonderful man, wonderful scholar, and fortunately I had known him basically when he was in his 20s. We were classmates at CMU back then. So it's always easier to ask your older friend to say, "Can you cover me?" Right? So it's part of a life friendship, which is really nice. So I actually had an interesting trip to New York because this quite famous scientist. I think he's a mathematician in the interface of physics. And then eventually he's tired of being a professor and made billions of dollars from hedge funds. So, so he had given a lot back to science, mostly in the form of encourage people to do so-called curiosity-based research. Because he said, if you look at most of the industrial support, even sometimes government support, they are aiming at much short term. So he said, there's plenty of money there. If I put in money, I would like to put money for much longer term. So I was quite fortunate 2 years ago. I was one of their so-called investigators, and so each year they run. So essentially, I receive a large grant from them to do curiosity-based research. That's literally the theme. And so each year they run an annual meeting in New York, and this basically has folks from math, physics, biology, chemistry, and so essentially for 2 days there's lectures in every such a discipline, including computer science. And this year the lecture in computer science is cryptography. So crypto was our representation this year for presentation. The rest are, like string theory, interface with mathematics, dark matters, and fascinating stuff. And but each time when I go there, I really feel two things. A is clearly the universe is big. The scientific activity are so broad that it's often challenging to understand people across disciplines. But the other thing which I actually feel increasingly great is that computer science overall actually gave quite robust training. So, for example, Simon being a physicist, his foundation support a lot of brilliant physicists. And the last time I take any class in physics was, I think, freshman in college, where I think we have 2 lectures on quantum mechanics. That's essentially the last few chapters of my physical education. And for a very long time, I know quantum mechanics essentially just like anyone on the street, from pop cultures. Because my research never went back to investigate those. And one of the first talk I went to Simon's Foundation 2 years ago, the first talk is quantum physics and mathematics. And for the first time, actually, I felt that at least conceptually, I no longer have obstacle to understand it. This is after years never think about physics and only about computer science. So for once, I recognized that if you look at one of the mathematical basis of quantum physics is instead of light travel as straight line, it's really travel as distributional path, right? As a younger people, when I was in college, it's just very difficult to somehow envision such a thing. Why, this distributional path, why is particularly important. But then when I look at my own domain, like computer science, So what is PageRank that we very popularly use for ranking web page? PageRank, what we do is you have this network, and you take these random walks, which means distribution of paths, then you do some measurements. And this accumulated measurement eventually define PageRank. So to a larger degree, somehow, even though the governing mathematics are different, we have certain type of Markov process, there's quantum mechanics, but somehow this fundamental notion of taking distribution of paths and making measurements, and if you do right measurement, somehow capture the phenomenon. So, yeah, it's a huge world. So today I would like to complete the technical discussion about the one-way function. So this will be hopefully close to the so-called technical chapters of our main discussion. And as we mentioned that the main concept is one-way function. And partially we cover this material is that this is one of the few examples in crypto that the existence of protocols depends upon a complexity assumption, rather than the complexity assumption of hardness of a particular problem. It's literally about a particular family of functions that they exist, rather than just a particular problem that is hard. Right? So one-way function largely is just a map that from so the infinite family of map parameterized by n, which is the dimension of the problem, or the number of variables, and it's a map from the hypercube of n dimension back to itself. And I think in this class it's just okay and probably better to think F is a permutation of the hypercube. Right, so it's much clearer if you just think about the permutation of hypercube. So that is either map an n-bit string to n-bit string in a bijective manner. Okay, so this is a function. And what it makes it a one-way is because it satisfies two conditions. One is F can be computed in polynomial time. So in other words, for all x belong to 0, 1 to n, fx can be computed in polynomial time. So this is a so-called one-way function. That is, it's much easier to evaluate. Right? So what makes them one-way is the difficult in the reverse direction, which stated in a probabilistic manner. Right? The probabilistic manner is that suppose we choose a random z belong to the n-dimensional cube, and we want to compute, for example, and then on input fz, we want to design algorithm that somehow try to recover this thing. Okay, so for random z. And so the statement is there's no then exists polynomial time algorithm. There's no polynomial time algorithm A that on input fz, which is z is randomly chosen from here, from the cube, that the probability A of fz is equal to z is small. It's greater than where all the negligible term is set up to be smaller than 1 over epsilon, 1 over polynomial. Right? So there's no polynomial time algorithm that can, upon receiving a random values of the function, recover the input with probability better than 1 over polynomial. Okay, so this equal is all better than 1 over polynomial. So this, so which means that it can only be correct with negligible fractions. Right? There's no algorithm on input Z can get correct with better than 1 polynomial probability. Right? So this two property is a very generic definition of hardness of function. Right? It basically says that it's hard to reward the function on average, right? Because I assume the input come out from average, but it's easier to compute always. Right? So one of the shining example of this is to show one-way function implies pseudo-random number. So one-way function imply pseudo-random number generator. So this is a complexity statement that I would like to pseudo-ly establish. I will give you a sketch of the proof of this statement. Okay. So if one-way function exists, if such function exists, then you can produce pseudo-random number generator. Then using it, you can do conventional symmetric key. Encryption. You can do classical encryption. Okay. So which means that if such a thing exists, essentially all the techniques that Professor Kevin Knight mentioned will not break this in polynomial time. Okay. In fact, no schema can break this in polynomial time. Okay. So this basically is the main mathematical statement. So this also allows us eventually to build encryption schema for and other protocols, not based upon just one or two problems, but really based upon a much broader family of assumptions. Because, the family of hard problems on which we can build crypto system is not completely discovered yet, right? So that's why people want to have a much broader guarantee than just rely on factoring is hard, right? Because once factoring is easy, then suddenly all schema based upon those will collapse. Okay. So this is what I would like to set up. And so along this direction, so one of the key concepts along this direction is a notion called hardcore bit. So hardcore bit was coming from two things. One is we would like to do pseudo-random number generator, which means we want to expand our random bits by at least one more bits. And that bit is hardcore bits, okay, just by definition. Secondly, hardcore bits came at least from the most intuitive level of the belief that if you have one-way function, which means you can hide this input data quite well, right? Because it's very hard to recover this input data. So you may not be able to hide the fraction of input data well, and minimally, one would expect you hide at least some bit well, some kind of algebraically defined bit well. That's essentially the strong belief that one-way function should have hardcore bits. Namely, otherwise, what is a one-way function? If every bit you can throw in is easy, right? So that's why the belief of a hardcore bit is implied by one-way function. It has always been strong and has been a remarkable conjecture of the field. Okay, so what is hardcore bit? Hardcore bit is another function HC that go from the hypercube to 0, 1. So it's just a map of the data into single bits. Right? Could be parity, could be some kind of Boolean expression of all the inputs. Right? So it could be fairly generically defined. But the hardcore bit has again the two properties. One, HC is in P, is polynomial time computable. And secondly, it will pass the following test. So imagine the input, let me put it here. Suppose input is given by fx. So let me be consistent with the other language. Let me consistent with that language. Choose a random z belongs to 0, 1. Okay, so we always talk about get a random message. And then on input, the fz. And one actually also know clearly n. N is an input parameter, so you can. But from now on, I just remove that with n. I keep on writing it. In our book, we keep on writing given n, right? Let's assume n is just given. Our algorithm have n. So on input this, so there's no algorithm. There's no algorithm on input n, fz, that can do the following. Have the probability of b of fz is equal to h of hardcore beta of z so no algorithm can achieve better than half. Okay, there's no algorithm upon receiving a random encoded data from this one-way function can guess these hardcore bits with a probability slightly better than flip coins. Okay, so this is called hardcore bits. It literally means that with respect to any polynomial time algorithm, HC, if you just run on the input, give you kind of random looking bits, because no one can predict this value from the value of the function. Right. So this, in some sense, is a sort of the tightest way to suggest that if such a thing exists, then you at least manipulate a computable bits that behave random against this one-way function. Right? That is, by output value of function, assuming input is randomly generated, then this bit is uncompromised. Right? This HC is uncompromised by the releasing of F. Right? So this essentially set up the basis for pseudo-random number generator. Because when you set up pseudo-random number generator, you just generate this. You choose a random seed R from 0, 1 to n, and you map it to FR. So this is the 1-bit n plus 1 expansion. Right. N plus 1-bit expansion. Right. So you go from n bits into n plus 1 bits. Because this data, from this data you can't predict this data, it's a kind of pseudo-random. So this literally is the rudimentary step of pseudo-randomness. Right? I finally manipulate a bit, it's pseudo-random against this, and since this is a permutation and R is random, and this whole thing is random, which means you have a random string followed by a single bit that's pseudo-random. Right, because computationally you cannot tell this apart from another random bit. Right? So then essentially they just continue to wrap this up to produce the pseudo-random sequence. They continue to use the combination of this. Okay. So you can think about pseudo-random construction is to map out the first bit, then you apply again to map out second bits, you apply again, map out third bit. So this allows you to do polynomial number of times. Okay. Good. So those schema are all essentially established. One of the main questions mathematically is does one-way function always have a hardcore bits? Right. So this is a profoundly mathematical question. Right. And so this is largely unsettled. But what remarkable is go to right hand 11. they cross this bridge by offering an alternative. Right? So they basically produce the following picture. So here we have a river, and we have one-way function. So this is one way. And on this side, we want to get the hardcore bit of f, which people say that's maybe hard, we don't know how to do. And what 11 and Goldreich has said, suppose you have one-way function on n bits. So what 11 and Goldreich find a particular place to cross this river by produce another function f bar, which is from 0, 1 to 2n. And it came with also a hardcore bits, XC. So let me just use a GL in honor of the inventors, Goldreich and 11. So this G is a hardcore bit. So this is a remarkable result they're able to manage, and without actually solving the original conjectures that one-way function, from any one-way function, you can always look at the program of one-way function and produce another program which is hardcore bits, right? So this is almost like this particular question is almost like compilation, right? If you give me a Java program of a one-way function, I should look at your program, and I should give you another Java program which is hardcore bits. So that's the original conjecture. So Levin said, well, don't know how to do that. What they can do is, if you have Java code for f, they can compile into another code called f bar, which has 2n bits permutation-wise, and they come together with another code, give you hardcore bits, right? So in their case, they did this very simple crossing. That is, they define f bar, x and r, where x and r are all n bits string, is just equal to fx. So this is a particular simple one-way function they output. And this also highlighted one-way function does leak a lot of data. You can let it leaking a lot of data, right? This one-way function leaks half of the data. Right? Because you offer out half of the data just in plain text. Right? You basically use the original one-way function to encode in the first half, and you just give up the second half. Right? So clearly, this as a one-way function is not skewed on this fraction of bits, right? So in order to make it skew, you have to be very careful to assemble those things, right? What they're able to offer, the construction GL of XR, is really smart. What they did is basically they computed the exclusive OR, so this based on 2, of I equal to 1 to n xi and ri. So this basically the hardcore bit construction comes from 11. Goldreich 11. Right? He said, if you have a one-way function f, I create another one-way function with the help of the second parameter r, and I use your original f to achieve the hardness of one-way function. Right? All the hardness of invertible come from f, not from the second parameter. But it uses the second parameter to create the hardcore bits. So in some sense, use the so-called randomness of the second parameter to create a random function. Right? This you can consider is really a random function, right? Because ultimately our x and r are chosen randomly. So which means that with respect to every x, when r is changing, it behaves like a random function on x, right? So because this is like a so-called random projection, so this is called random projection. Okay. So in fact, random projection has been widely used today, for example, in data mining. You know, a large body of data mining techniques basically are you take a larger data matrix, you hit a few random directions to produce a low-dimensional image, then you try to do data data clustering or data analysis at a lower dimension, right? So random projection has a variety of many other applications, but in this particular application, the attempt to use random projection is to make the function unpredictable, right? Make this function even harder. Right? So this way, it's like every time you have family of randomly constructed bits associated with the first half. Okay? So the main mathematical result, I'll go to right 11. Is that if f is one way. So I used this already in a very loose language now, right? Because usually I have to say there's an infinite family of a one-way function that, because everything has to be parameterized when n goes to infinity, right? But I will not use that accurately to say, so here I'm just slightly more loosely stated the result, which particular function. Technically it should be a family of function when n go to infinity, okay? So if f is a one-way or a family of one-way function, then f bar is also one-way. And Q, GL is f bar hard-coded. So this is the main mathematical theorem from Goldenrock 11. If the original function is one way, then f bar is also one way. This is trivial to prove. Why? Because just by definition. Because f bar inherits the odd hardness of f, therefore it's one way, right? And but the hardcore bits they create is very difficult to recover. Okay, so I would like to at least sketch the main idea of how this is proved, just like the book, and so it's give you at least some sense of certain steps at the beginning are quite elementary. That's why also hopefully this illustrates as a good example of research step people take when facing a huge open question, right? I guess one of the first steps is that you ask you all the open question and their motivation why we have this open question. Do you need it in the manner it's stated, or you can have an alternative, slightly weaker version? Right? So that's clearly Goldenrock 11 fundamentally recognize not only they need to solve the connection between one-way function and the hardcore bits, but they also knew the broad context is actually to create a pseudo-random number generator and encryption scheme, right? So that's why they know you don't have to rely on just the function itself. You can actually manipulate the function, right? So that's why their program fundamentally is to compile a one-way function to another one-way function, rather than just compile one-way function working hard to identify which bit is hard, right? They literally take an alternative way, just compile one-way function into another one, and then it gave you an easier solution for the purpose you need, that is to build pseudo-random number generator. Okay. So let me just give at least the highlight of what are the important ideas behind this construction. The construction is done, right? There's nothing magical now, right? The main thing is how do we make the argument, right? So their first toy observation is following. This toy observation didn't solve the problem, but essentially highlight the possibility this may work, right? So the toy solution. So let me use as a lemma. So they did just like a book, step by step to realize they can actually possibly create this. So they first basically say, what is first evidence that this may actually work, right? So the first evidence it may actually work, what they observe is following. Imagine that there exists a p-time, suppose there exists a polynomial time algorithm. So let's be given a name, let's just call it B, the bit predictors. Suppose it's this algorithm that for all x and r, B of f, x, and r. Right. So in other words, so this clearly equal to B of fx and r, right? Because this is equal to this, right? So it's equal to GL. Suppose it's true. Suppose we have polynomial time algorithm, where give the value of the function is accurately predict. Go to 11 bits. This is clearly a very strong assumption, right? Because usually when we define, we're asking whether you can predict just slightly better than coins, right? So here, suppose I have 100%. So this is a 100% quantity. Suppose I have 100% way to break this bit, right? So go to right level and want to say, if this is true, then f is not value. Which means that this is another algorithm, polynomial time algorithm. Let's call that algorithm I, the inversion function, such that the probability, or such that in this case there's no probability. I just do a statement. That for all x and r, I, when you receive fx r is equal to x and r. So if you're able to compute this, you break the f, right? Because you get the original input of r. Right. So here, why don't I just continue to write this way now, fx. Right. So when we prove that, suppose you have an algorithm can always break these particular bits, then you can actually invert. Right. So remember we proved a parallel statement about RSA, right? Remember we said if you have an algorithm that can always get the parity bits of RSA, then you can actually break RSA, right? So this is the same statement, right? With no probability involved, right? So it's the same thing to say if you can get the bits, I can just decode. And this is the same statement to say, if you're able to get this bit is so powerful, it allows you to decode. Right? This mechanism of getting bits is so powerful that allow you to do polynomial number of queries to decode. Right? So just like, remember we did binary search against the data in RSA, right? Because RSA has this homomorphic properties on multiplicative operators, and we keep on multiplying by 2, right? Then we just use this last bit of query to continue to guide our binary search, and here is true too, right? So here is, this argument is essentially almost trivial. So here is how they created this predictor I. So they basically say, suppose you can always get correctly, then you can really separate f and r in the following way. So imagine you look at this. If you run your B on fx, and imagine you run on this string 1, 0, and 0. Suppose you run on this string. Okay? So what is this string? Because you said this is equal to GL of x and r, right? Namely GL 1, 0, right? Because we said suppose you run this string, because you're always correct. Well, let me just call it, right? On the input I like. So if I call this on this data, then clearly it's because by this assumption you are correct to x against this data. So what is this data? This data we said is an exclusive OR of x1 and 1 the rest are zeros, right? Because 0 and xi is 0. They made no contribution to exclusive OR, and this is just actual. Right? So this is how powerful this bit. This is called right 11 bit is. If you allow me, you somehow begin to break it, right? If you can break every bit every time accurately, then if I just make this query, it's almost like make a query to your original data. Right? So I just ask you, so this normally we write down as E1. Right? So in general, we can write more generally. We can write B, fx, 0, then 1. So this at location I, 0. So this we normally call EI. So let me put down here EI, E1, okay. And similarly, this we will know is exclusive OR of xi and 1 equal to xi. Right. So this, how simple, you can say how simple it is, but it's intuition, right? Why they somehow began to use this as possibility to set up, right? So you can see a lot of those proof mathematically, they came from simple steps. So this is why it's important about research, is you have to continue to think through certain things, because it's those small steps, somehow accumulatively, they can put together into remarkable arguments, right? So clearly, even though this didn't prove the theorem, and I think the first time they realized this, they knew they at least on kind of right track, because these bits they create are quite correlated with inversion, right? So because he said, you know, if you can get this bit correctly, whenever I need to decode a one-way function, I just call upon your collective behavior with some predictable bits that I choose, right? Remember, this is just almost like RC hacking on multiplied by 2, right? Because we keep on asking what's your encoding of x, what encoding of 2x, what encoding of 4x. Then we use that as a predictor, right? And here, similar, right? So this is profound, in part because this means that the GL bits are, if you can get 100% correct, you literally break it, the one-way function, right? Because this gives you polynomial time algorithm, right? You just go in for I equal to 1 to n, you just ask for this polynomial time algorithm, and it will come back just with the bit, you just compose it. And this basically gives you an inversion, right? Because R is free. Okay? So you literally break this one-way function, okay? So clearly, this is not enough to prove that this bit is skewed, because we have much bigger margin, right? We're not saying that we can guess the bit 100%. You know, when we do coin flip, we never say guess the bit 100%, then nobody will pass the test, right? Here we only say guess the bit almost right. And not even almost right, just show you have a little bit of knowledge of the bits, so that you can beat a random flips, right? I mean, this is at least how I take GRE, right? So this literally, you know, we study hard only just to gain a little bit of last guess, right? Most of the time it's just random, you just put a random score there. Okay? So how do they begin to move on? They began to change their observation to make it stronger, to see where it still holds, and then they eventually try to realize the facts, the truth, right? So the next step they did is basically, okay, since 100% we got you, so let's just intuitively say, I want to weaken this assumption enough that I can still invert. Right, so this at least shows partial progress towards the confidence on these bits. Right? So the next one they modify is that suppose they use this polynomial time algorithm, instead of say 100% beat it, they say 75% beat it. suppose you can you can better 75%. Then they want to argue that is enough to recover as well. Okay? So how do we state a 75 state? So that's why you can see the moment you need to drive towards truth, you are formulating the question yourself along the way, right? So how do we formulate the exist polynomial time algorithm that's a better 75%? So essentially we put a 3 divided by 4 plus 1 over volume. Right? So we try to talk about these margins right now, right? So let me restate this. And instead of saying this is equal to this, let me change this as a probability statement. As a probability. So instead of say this, then I will say the probability x and r from 0, 1 to n, that b fx r is equal to TL x and r is more than 3 divided by 4 plus 1 over 20. Right. So this eventually I will use as the epsilon n when I continue to argue. Okay? Is that suppose you have this algorithm that can better the bit a little bit more better than 75%. Now we score to 75, right? We suddenly say, if you're that good student is enough to invert the function, right? So before they said, if you're perfect students to get this bit, you invert the function, right? Because you just ask the student a few questions, you invert the question, the function. So now he said, suppose you have a slightly weaker students who can only score 75% of the time, plus, then you just want to use the 75% plus to say, again, f is not one way, which means there is another algorithm I that just rely on the input, can do correctly. And clearly you can't see for all now, right? So that's why you can see, as it goes along, they have to change the formulations, right? So that's why I want to do this step by step to see how theorem and lemmas claims for prediction are somehow formulated. Right? So they said, okay, we can't do for all. Then we just say the probability x and r such that I fx and r is equal to x and r. So this is how is that. If you have an algorithm that's better than epsilon n, then you can decode by the margin of epsilon, right? So ultimately, now you can see, right, what they really want to put this one to be. For what value this will be proof of the theorem? Half, right? So you can see, before they did 100%, that's how you can see incrementally when mathematicians couldn't solve the problem in one shot, they approach the problem. Right? So this I call iterative method for proving. Right? Every time you prove a little bit stronger, and there is certain intuition, as you can see in the proof, why suddenly they see 75%. And afterward, it's some many more months of effort eventually driving this to 50%. Okay. Right. So this is exactly where I want to, particularly for this class, for you to think about when you're facing new problem. Fundamentally, is that no one can solve problem in one shot. That's why I personally don't already like homework or exams. Because, we're asking students, but we have to do it most of the time, right? Because learning are the one which you have to sharpen your knife and you have to do it, right? That's why we try to carefully design enough tasks and homework so that you can make step-by-step progress. But in real life, both research and development, you're mostly facing a problem you just have no idea to accomplish, right? But often people make progress because if they begin to have certain framework, of making progress. Right? So just like here, right? Once they have a framework, they continue to reformulate the problem. Right? They reformulate what they can do, and let me tell you, most of the time, for example, when I do research, I'm also learning those examples you try to draw the map. Most of the time, it goes nowhere. Right? Eventually, it's any place you said either false or I can't do it anymore. Right? But remarkably few times, when you just keep on squeezing your path, you begin to find that continuous improvement on what you want to establish. And sometimes you solve the problem that you really want to solve, or sometimes you realize you actually still didn't solve that problem, you solved some other problem. Right? Just like here, right? Because they're continuous push, solve another problem, but still in this incremental fashion, right? Because there's a big open question governing them in which way to incrementally set up conjectures and steps, right? So those, what I call research, or creativity, right? Because when you in industry, when you produce new product, it doesn't mean that people immediately thought about the best product, right? A lot of times, this is what's called mathematical trial and error, right? Okay, so clearly, ultimately, we want this to be 50%, right? Ultimately, that's basically. But you can see, even put 75%, it's still there's certain challenge one has to mentally overcome. Okay, just like here, we have to say 100% yield, and with a 75% will yield. Right? So 75. So this one thing is important for this one is it's allow them to understand the structures of their problem. Right? What they understand is that if you have these predictors, you can use a second parameter to keep on poking around, hoping that you can poke off enough information. Right? So that's why this second parameter R really behave like a way to set you have this magnifier in this verb for the area, right? And this R put the magnifier somewhere. Then basically this statement roughly says you can't get accurate signals, but you can get accurate enough signals, right? So then one of the attempt intuitive said if you keep on doing this, maybe you can get a few independent trial signal, then you take a majority. You're guessing bits, right? If every time I can have a little bit positive correlated answer, I do several times take a majority. Usually that's one way to concentrate. Right? So this is exactly what they did. So they said, if you do accurately, this will give you the bits, right? But for example, one of the challenges they're facing now is that they don't know whether this bit is correct. B is correct, right? They don't know. They only know 75% time is correct. Right? They have no idea how this is correct or not. Right? Because the 25% time B is wrong. But it's not labeled to say I'm not correct. It's only probabilistically guaranteed. Right? So in this case, they use this logic at least to attempt to figure out under what condition you can get a bit right. Right? So that's become one of the mathematical questions. How much correct data I can get a bit right? And then you want to take that as a probabilistic statement, and you can do repeat sample. Right? So let me just work on this space to show that there's other way to get a bit right. Is following. So imagine that if you look at this function, suppose you get GL x and R. Suppose you get this bit right. Suppose you got this bit right. Okay? And suppose you also get GL x and R. And this R is perturbed by, so let me use the perturbation by e to the ei. Suppose you got this both right. Suppose you happen to get both of these bits correct. Right. I have an input x, I try to poke around. I hit a random string, I got it correct. Because you said 75% is correct, which means intuitively I hit a random, I should get 75% correct. Right? Because that's where the average roughly is. And then suppose you hit again by flipping out the bits. right? And intuitively, there's another 75% is correct, right? So this together, I claim, if both are correct, then you can actually get xi, okay? Why you can get xi? Because if you look at suppose the first answer is y1, second answer is y2, right? So what is y1? y1 is equal to this exclusive OR of x1, xi, and xj, and rj. So this is a y1. So what is y2? y2 basically is this exclusive OR of xj and rj for j is not equal to I, and continue to exclusive OR with xi and r j negation. Right, this is literal negation, right? So this that we write out is this is literally xi and rj ri exclusive with 1. Right, so this is a negation of ri, right? Because I pick up another bit here. Right, I perturb this bit, I flip that bit. This means that I flip nothing but that bit, right? Ri exclusive is E. R inclusive E means I flip the I bits, right? Because this is all point-wise. You know, remember our one-time pad, right? This is my one-time pad against EI, right? So which means every other bit is the same. I flip one bit. Okay. So if you put this in together, if you look at y1 exclusive OR with y2, right? If you look at this quantity, so here let me also write this way: j is not equal to I, and exclusive OR of xi and xj, rj, right? So y1 is this quantity, y2 is this quantity. When you exclusive them OR together, what happened to this part? When exclusive OR this part, what happened to this part? They're gone. What is 1 exclusive OR with 1? 0. What is 0 exclusive with 0? 0, right? Exclusive OR with yourself become 0 for every variable, right? So this means that if you exclusive OR x1, x2, so this really gives you set up a mask, right? So this really shows a little mask, right? This is really like a mathematical mask. It's basically said that you can set up this I-split mask that if you can get both correctly, then what happened to this exclusive OR? This exclusive OR, if you look, says that xi will either get a 1 or xi either get 0, and or vice versa. So which means one of them get xi, the other get 0. Right? So this gives you xi. So this is a mathematical basis. It said that if I give you x, that you want fx you want to invert, if I'm allowed to poke around on R, if I happen to poke around R and R perturbed by the ith bit, if I get both correct, I actually get that bit correct. Right? This is all eventually can only be used stochastically, right? Because there's no way for sure that we know this is true, that they are correct. But this is just a mathematical property. If they happen to be correct, then you have your chance to poke out that the bit is correlated, which means if you can get both correct, then you actually get that the bit correct. Right? If you're both correct, you can get that the bit correct. Okay? So let's think a little bit as a probability now, right? So this mathematically everyone see, right? it's just simple properties of what I call linear algebra. This is really like a linear space, right? In linear space based on 2, there's nothing more than that, right? This is you multiply, and the other one is your sum, right? It's your linear space based on 2. No, right? It's just a linear space based on 2, okay? So that this is how a linear algebra is powerful, right? Once you think of it properly, right? So, so what is probability this can be correct? What is probability this can be? Let's just crudely think about this. Then I will try to make them formal. Right? Crudely, we said a 75% chance they may be correct. So which means whenever, suppose I just, when I'm facing X, I choose a random R, I choose this thing. Because both are random, right? Because if R is random, then R plus E is also random, right? So suppose it happened to be, if I choose R, 75% I can get correct. If I choose this, 75% I can choose correct. What is the probability I get both correct? I mean, you just did your calculation. What's probability I get both correct?
9 out of 16.
Huh?
9 over 16, like I said.
25% I got it wrong on both. But I'm slightly less than 25% I got it wrong, right? So I can get both correct, basically still with half plus epsilon. I can get both correct with probability half plus epsilon, this is what I claim. Why? Because the probability to get this wrong is less than 25%. The probability to get this wrong is less than 25%. So which means the probability to get both one of the two wrong is less than 50%. And this less than 50% is literally this guy. Intuitive, right? So this is intuitive to say that if I happen to have such luxury students, I'm able to get this bit intuitively correct with probability better than half now, right? So which means that if you try a few more times, take a majority, I should concentrate to get you correct, right? So this is basically how eventually you can magnify the odds, okay? But still, I've essentially reached to here. I reached there to this epsilon and for that bits, right? So this is basically how 75 intuitively set up, right? Because they said that you need to get 2 events correct. You want to get 2 events correct, if you need to beat the 50%, you need 75% students to do this, right? Because that's your 25% plus 25% you lose, right? And if you have a student slightly better than 75% students, the margin you will keep. That's your half plus epsilon. So this argument is very crude right now, because technically what I'm saying is not correct yet. But it's just the very loose intuition here, and I can try to make it formally correct. Okay? So how do they make it formal? So this you can see is slightly less formal, but once they make it formal, the reason why they want to make it formal, even though this didn't solve the problem yet, is because they want to say, if I make this formal, if I want to drop the quality of my student from 75% to 50%, how do you want to improve your argument, right? So that's why you often want to have end-to-end argument first. So that's why often if you look at the companies, they're very clever, right? When they go to market, they first announce a product. The first product typically are not totally perfect, right? But somehow once they did one product, it allows them to have experience to make a better product again. Right? Because they have a lot of experience of this blueprint, how to sell, market, build, repair, service of this product, right? So it's allow them to continue to build out experience. And this assumption is a very similar type of exercises, right? That is, you want to get one proof through, then you want to change your assumption to match what you want, then clearly they will break. If it didn't break, you already celebrate, you move on to solve other problems, right? But if they break, then it allows you to say, okay, I will continue try to move towards the goal, in which way I can make everything through. Right? Okay. So any question up to here? Right. So this essentially is motor intuition. I try to say is that the step I'm going to do is only just a little bit try to show you that certain things need to be made more formal, but ultimately the image is just here. That is, for them, they first realize if you have perfect students, you can just go to poke the bit one at a time. You will get the answer. Then is that you have imperfect students, you can poke the bit at 2 random shots. So that's why I call this R. Really, it's a random place you take a magnify. But you can take what you call differential analysis. That is, you go there, and then you also ask for a differential question there. You go to a random spot, ask a differential question. And this is your differential question. Right? You remember, this is like taking gradient, right? This is how you take a gradient in the real data, right? That is, you go to a place, then you said, do you want to go left or right? You said, yeah, let's get right too, let's take a difference, right? In physics, that's essentially most of the time we analyze things, right? Namely, we go to value, we go to neighbor, then we take a difference. And this is your difference, right? But this is a random spot take a difference to learn a function. That is, you have this function you don't, the data you don't know, and then you just go to a random place. You do this sensor, you say here, and a directional analysis, which is this. Then you just take a guess. You compile. Then you go to another place, you do this. So then you get several trials of this, then you take a majority. Right? This is exactly just that picture. Right? That is, you go to, because this problem is so richly built, it allows you to go to different random locations to take this differential analysis to review your principal directions. That's your EI. Right? That's why this is linear algebra. You literally go to a place, you march left, march up, march down. You know, you have this n principal direction, right? So you just go to a random place, you just go left, up, down, you just go to these EIs. Then you do this differential analysis, you keep your bits. And then you go to another random spot, you do this up and down difference test, you keep your bits, then you just take a majority. Right? So that's literally that mental picture. Okay? And what they want to argue is that they eventually want to understand a formal language. What is a one-way function? Right? So one-way function, remember, when we define, one-way function, basically we want to say is that we want to prove there's a polynomial fraction of data you can invert. Remember, one-way function is never about for every data you can invert. Right? One-way function is defined to say that if I show you that you can't invert any small fraction, then you're one-way. So in order to prove something is not a one-way function, which means you beat it, you just need to show you invert a polynomial fraction of your data. You don't even care which polynomial fraction. You just need to prove this polynomial fraction of data I can invert now, with decisive probability. Then you actually prove the statement that this function is not one-way in this abstract definition, right? So that's why one-way function is not this simply to say that every time I evaluate, you can't get anything back out of this my parameter. It only means you can't get enough fraction of the data, right? Right. So that's why for them to prove this, they had a lot of gap and room that they allow them to harness. That is, they don't need to prove for all x you can invert. They just need to prove there's a non-trivial fraction of x you can invert. Right? Then you achieve your goal. Right? So that's essentially where they can make it formal. So let me just do a sketch to make that formal. My board will be here. Right? I can use this one. Okay, I still have decent time. Oh, before, so maybe I give you a short break, then I can go this formal. So I sent out the presentation time, and you mentioned to me that I actually include in my old list of Thanksgiving Day, right? So I can't use November 23rd, so clearly I signed nobody November 23rd. And so far I did make schedule, starting with 14. And if any of you want to do earlier on November 09, happen to be ready, then we have a few students scheduled as three presentation per class. And if anyone wants to do 9, we can move someone up. If nobody's ready, don't worry about it. I have plenty of material to cover for that class. Okay. So just because some of you offered just say, put me in any slot, and so those clearly I put in a little bit early slot. Some people just say put me in the early slot, as I put it there. So I try to maximize most of the match, but clearly certain students. I think Shang basically offered early slot too. For now, I put in the late slot. But if somebody happened to move forward, maybe Shang can move forward, open up. Because more ideally, we do two per lecture, but 3 is totally manageable because we have 2 hours.
How long is the presentation?
Huh?
How long?
About between 30 minutes to 45. Yeah, 30 minutes, 45, yeah. And I think, who said that they have a birthday couldn't move? You have a birthday. 20th?
The 20th, yeah.
20th,
I don't
okay.
want to do the...
You don't want to do your birthday. I mean, every time I watch a baseball game, they always say, this pitcher walked out, he thinks it's birthday, then he strike out all the batters and he won, right? You don't want to do on your birthday. I respect that, but so since my birthday is always not in the semester, so I have a May 9th birthday, so usually it's right after class. So anyhow, so let me know. But otherwise, we have a quite comfortable enough schedule, starting at 14, and just happen to be, if any of you happen to be ready, then I think it will help the class if we can forward moving. Initially, I tried to put in November 9th, but I guess when I click, I somehow didn't click the 9th, but instead I clicked the 23. And that's how my method, otherwise I feel that's just perfect. I was looking to schedule today, then eventually I saw your email to say 23rd is not usable. And I said, oh, that's why it's a little bit jammed. And then I said, I thought about this problem. It shouldn't be jammed. It should be only 1 or 2 lectures out with 3. But I think you two will do a team one, right? So your day, even though it's 3 people, may still behave almost like two people. Yeah. Any question up to here? So let me just try to sketch it out, essentially the outline of the proof, and at least to give you some example of how things are made formal. But mostly, I was hoping this analysis will give you even stronger sense of what is a one-way function, right? Because otherwise, we keep on saying one-way function is fairly loosely stated, and it's very hard to really get a sense of it. But I think such analysis really pin down all the important properties of one-way function. Okay? So one-way function means that we need to decode a fraction of the data. We need to decode at least polynomial fraction of data. That's called a one-way function. That's called non-one-way function, right? One-way function means no polynomial time algorithm can decode a polynomial fraction of data. So which means a function is not a one-way, means there exists a polynomial fraction of data that you can decode in polynomial time, right? So this is what Goldreich and Levin attempt to achieve, right? So the first they analyze this property. So let me talk this a little bit that I can. Yeah, even though I thought about the board and I still didn't put the board in the right manner. So if you look at this statement, the probabilities on both x and r. And here, in some sense, we want to decide what is a possibly good x that we want to break, right? So because we only need to beat a fraction of the data, so let's beat the data that is favorable to us, right? So let's define which fraction of data we want to beat. The rest we don't care, right? Because we are not tested on them. We only need to beat a polynomial fraction of data. right? So let's convert this into a attempt to guess what are good set of data to be, okay? So currently we said in our assumption that we have this algorithm B that on fx and r is equal to x and r, right? So this is the probability of x and r belong to 0, 1 to n. Right. So we said this is true better than 3/4 plus epsilon. Right. So this is the assumption, right? This is the assumption. Right. So this is the assumption we have, right? We have this no, I think I was wrong, right? We have this GL. Sorry, we have this assumption. Our assumption is that we have this bit predictor. That if you randomly choose x and r from n, then I am correct with slightly more than 75 points in my exam. Right? That's what we stated. So because this is working for both of x and r, so I would like to recognize a subset of x that I can invert for one-way function, right? Because we want to invert a polynomial fraction of 0, 1 to the n against f. This is our objective, right? We want to beat f by a polynomial fraction of n, right? So let me define the object, the set as shall we all take a break and I can continue? Please, one person. Yeah, I can. Let's all take a break. Yeah. So I have just